The child was born and couldn't sit still. 86 years later with no regret. You know that man can't sit still yet. The Great Depression couldn't get him down. He worked for his dad's store in town, collecting money in small amounts for poor whites and blacks in their furniture accounts. Stetson Kennedy wants us all to be free. Stetson Kennedy wants us all to be free. As he'd collect, he'd talk to folks. He'd hear legends, tales, songs, and jokes. Now this fine treasure he'd record and write. He was colorblind, didn't see black and white. Writer's project for the WPA. With Zora Neale Hurston, he earned his pay. Crackers and blacks, they talk for hours. It was a barefooted history in this land of flowers.
The week of it was on the 2nd of December 2017. Our first program of December from WBRN Radio in Boston and on the Bostonred Network. This was a momentous night on Friday night, as early Saturday morning, the passage of the first major tax overhaul since the Reagan era. The taxes were overhauled in the U.S. It has passed the Senate, which was a foregone conclusion, basically, given the nature of the Republican Party, not of the D.J. Trump administration. This has been something that the right-wingers, like Paulie Ryan, had been pushing for a very long time, and others in that make up the Republicans in Congress. You have a hard ultra-right and Rand type operation going on there. So what they finally accomplished, and this was the reason that the Republican Party is going along with D.J. Trump, to pass the tax giveaway to Wall Street and to the banks. And basically the 1% and 2% of the nation. We have an article here from the Associated Press which lays out the tax plan. We'll be looking at it in several different directions. We have Uncle Carl here, but Uncle Carl was before it passed. At one time, the GOP was full of so-called deficit hawks. They were interested in the deficit under President Barack Obama. Now they're not interested in the deficit. It was just a ploy. Now deficits in themselves, it's $28 trillion now. In a modern industrial capitalist country, does not mean that much. However, if you have to borrow money, then it does mean more than normal. The amount that you pay on your interest itself starts to clog up the works, so to speak, like cholesterol. Nonetheless, the Republicans, this is from the Associated Press, pushed through a $1.5 trillion bill for the Senate early this morning. After bursts of 11-hour harsh trading, as the party strived all year for a major legislative package. Well, and Senator D.J. Trump in time for Santa. Big bills are rarely popular. You can remember how unpopular Obamacare was. That's according to the Senate leader, old man McConnell. Drugging off polls showing scarce public enthusiasm for the measure, he said, the legislation would prove to just what the country needs. Now, you have to look at the economic the economic background that we're looking at right now. Relatively low inflation, but they're just creeping up. In the energy sector, gasoline is creeping up. Food prices, in other words, that's where volatility is. You have record low unemployment. Part of the reason that you have record low unemployment is that they only count people that are out of work for 27 weeks. The labor force participation rate is about 61 to 62. It's up probably a percentage point. But with the number of redundancies on the part of the baby boomers, it would barely be a replacement equation going on there. And also, as we move into more automated or autonomous self-driving automobiles, we'll start to see some unemployment there, particularly in people that drive taxis and driving things in general. It'll move first to taxis in the U.S. They're already doing those experiments in Australia and various other places. You'll see more of this in the U.S. Coming about, and jobs will be eliminated. What happens in the software industry is you start out with a beta, which is a beta, which you want to pronounce it. You start out with one of those, but and then you go to a quote-unquote release candidate. But Microsoft basically has been pushing their products out when they were pushing out the operating systems, OSs. The beta would basically be out there, and then all of a sudden they would just come out with the gold edition and not the RC candidate. So with these cars, basically you'll have the same thing. So what starts to happen is, and this will happen this year, a little behind, was supposed to start in Q4, but next year, 2018, they'll start pushing these out, and they will take on more and more cars as they go. GM will have their version out, the Google people, their version, and several others will start pushing more and more of these out. Tesla and those people already have cars that can parallel park, etc. So they'll start to gain momentum. And also what happens after initial 24 months, it becomes cheaper to outfit the cars, and then you'll have this, and this is where you will start getting into some redundancies there that could pull the unemployment rate up, say, a percentage point. That's why the so-called promises here of this bill, and this is over now 10 years or a decade, have a very difficult chance of panning out. Also, at the same time, when you have low unemployment rates as you do now, and historically low, we used to do 2.5 3 percentage points as what we call maximum unemployment, or employment, excuse me. Now it's basically 4.5. Now it's 3.5. So in other words, you are getting into that territory. The old timers used to say 3 in 10 chance of finding a job. Well, there are plenty of jobs on the higher level and on the lower level. Let me finish up the AP's article here. It was approved 51 to 49. Bob Coker, he's from Tennessee, was the only lawmaker to cross the lines. None of the Democrats voted for this disastrous bill. It will be part of the 2018 election. Now, given the history of recessions, booms, busts, and that sort of thing, that could easily happen before the 2018 election in November of next year, almost a year away. Republicans, of course, touted the package as one that would benefit people of all incomes, ignite the economy, projection, official projection of $1 trillion over 10 years, deepen the budget deficit, couldn't dissuade the senators. No, because 10 years from now, the senators that are there now will all be retired. They'll picture on our marquee of them wheeling in. I believe I had to look at it twice. Thought it was Owen McCain. It's a senator from Mississippi, I believe. In other words, obviously I'm a kind of a dinosaur on fiscal issues. That's from Coker. Coker was one of the big cheerleaders for this particular bill, who battled to keep the bill from worsening the government's accumulated $20 trillion IOU. Well, it's $20 trillion now, and growing there. After spending the first 9 months, that was trying to repeal Obamacare. They did get some repealing in. The Congress's nonpartisan Joint Committee on Taxation has said the bill reduces for many families would be modest, and by 2027, families earning under $75,000 would on the average face higher and not lower tax bills. So that's 2027. So in other words, taxes will go up. It's 479 pages. Some the materials written in there literally by hand in the margins. Johnson from Wisconsin, you really don't need to read this kind of legislation. Obviously not, told reporters from Madison, Wisconsin. That's why the Senate was approving a bill some senators hadn't read. Most of them had not read it. 427 pages. Those clowns, most of them couldn't read 10 pages. Need to study it and get the feedback from affected groups. They aren't doing this, and there's a reason for this. In fact, they tried to slip a provision in there. There's some right-wing crazy college in Michigan called Hillsdale College. That's where a lot of the right-wingers went to school there in Michigan after beginning the stretch into Friday. GOP leaders nailed down the support they needed. They control things, see, by 52 to 48. Could lose no more than 2 senators. In other words, this is one senator from losing actually 2 senators, because they have Pence, their leaders, changes including helping millions of companies whose owners pay individual, not corporate taxes on their profits, allowing deduction of 23%. That's up from 17.4%. That helped win over Johnson and Daines of Montana. Well, yeah, but again, they lose some deductibility here. They threw in a $10,000 property tax thing. That's what Susan Collins, she's from Maine, insisted on. That would be helping in so-called highest tax states, California, New Jersey, and New York. They added $300 billion to the tax cost to pay for that. Leaders reduced the number of high earners who must pay the alternative minimum. That was talking about eliminating it completely. It also increased a one-time tax on profits of U.S.-based corporations who are holding their money overseas. We'll see how many of those do it. This Jeff Fleck character, like Coker, had been a holdout. It doesn't matter, he's retiring. And this is another thing to be pointed out. A lot of these birds will literally be flying the coop. The Senate bill would drop the highest personal tax bracket from 39.6 to 38.5, roughly a little over 1 and 1.1 and 1.1 tiff drop there, and the estate tax levied on a few thousand of the nation's largest inheritance would be narrowed to affect even a lower thing. Deduction for state and local income tax, moving expense, and other items would vanish. Now, that will hit an increasing mobile economy. A lot of young people move from city to city, state to state, etc. They could expense that out. But what they would be doing is doubling the standard deduction from roughly $6,000 to $12,000 for individuals, $24,000 for couples. And the tax credit per child tax credit would grow. The bill would abolish the Obamacare requirement that most people buy health coverage or face a tax penalty. Well, the Supreme Court knocked out the tax penalty. It's added to the tax bill, but there's not a requirement. Industry experts say that would weaken the law by easing pressure on healthier people to buy a coverage. And the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office said that it would push premiums up. You're going to see premium increase, and 13 million people will end up being uninsured. And to make matters worse, the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, that's in Alaska, and end up would knock out because it violates no provision was knocked out and violates the budget agreement. They would which Enia wanted to inscribe in the bill. There are also breaks for wine, beer, sports. Alaska natives. I guess that was for Susan McCloskey there. In other words, all kinds of things were put into this bill. It was one big giveaway. Let me go to our regular roundup here. We'll look at this from a different quarters here. And whoops. Here we go. Passed is a major victory. Well, part of the problem that happened was the plea, and we'll get to that in a minute, by Mr. Flynn. And that was the story of the day. So, in other words, you won't see much of that. Joint Committee on Taxation, nonpartisan tax, and I found that only 4% of taxpayers would see their burden reduced by more than $500. That's in 2019. So, in other words, given the higher cost of energy in terms of fuel oil, gasoline, etc., will eat up that $500. They didn't tell people about that. It authorized drilling again in the Arctic. This is from the Washington Post. National Wildlife Refuge in Alaska by curtailing deductions for state and local. A lot of this stuff was very mean-spirited, targeted at progressive states. But as anything else, when it goes up, people will forget about it. Mr. Flynn pled guilty to lying to the FBI about his connections with the Russian ambassador. So the people that folded up here was Jeff Fleck. He's not running re-election. Susan Collin. One thing to remember, these Republicans are Republicans at heart, and she was, I believe, just re-elected, so she's not facing the people. Yes, vote because he said he had secured from leadership backing for two priorities, one related to how businesses conduct major investments like equipment and involving the immigrants. That's the DREAM Act. They'll probably double-cross him on that. He's a long-time proponent of reforming immigration laws and wants permanent protection for dreamers. He said the vice president, an ultra-right-winger named Pence, has agreed to work with him on the issue. But they have nothing going other than that. In other words, the promise that'll be forgotten. Now, to the pass-through, we've talked about that, allowing pass-through owners to deduct 17.4% of their income from their taxes and pay taxes on the remainder. Now, reluctantly raised the deduction level to 20%, which adds was not generous enough to 20%, which adds roughly $60 billion to the size of the tax cut. Johnson continued holding out, and on Friday he said the deduction was raised to 23% to secure his support. Collins said the leadership had promised her the bill would protect certain deductions individuals use to lower their bill, including matters related to healthcare expense, tax payments there. Well, she also agreed to, and this still has to go to a conference with the House. From Claire McCaskill, said she received a list of planned changes from lobbyists, not from Republicans in the Senate, who are keeping their decisions closely held. 479 pages of the draft were leaked out to the public, including several handwritten changes to the bill. Democrats were left out of this process, did not have a seat at the table. Some of the handwritten changes were crammed in the margins, hard to decipher, no doubt about that. Tesler of Montana posted a video acting incredulous as he slammed the bill down on the table. This is your government at work, he said. This was nothing but a field day for the lobbyists, period there. So now the Republicans have to take ownership of this situation. The amendment debate over something by right-wing Ted Cruz, otherwise known as Lion. Ted, these are health-saving accounts to allow them to apply the expense for religious schools, homeschooling students. The amendment stood at 50-50 after Collin and Lisa Murkowski joined the Democrat vote no. Pence was summoned to break the tie. So this is something they've been always trying to do. Let's go here. Anyway, this is from the Post. Just Michael Flynn was the big item today. The tax bill had to take a back seat to it, and the Post has winners and losers in the bill. Along with the winner here, of course, DJ Trump. A beautiful tax cut by Christmas, he said, and the centerpiece to get it in at least as early as 2018. Big corporations, of course, they won the House and Senate bill, slashed the top corporate rate to 20% from 35%, while few corporations actually pay that. The average is around 25%, so they'll get a 5% break. Most still get a break. Apple and Microsoft get to bring back piles of cash sitting offshore at a low rate of 14.5. Individuals don't work at that. Dow surged 2,400 for the first time this week. The market's up about 600 points. That's 3%. As investors cheer the tax cuts. Well, how long will the cheering go? Many in the middle class, at least for a while, Republicans sold that plan as a boost to middle class paychecks. Of course, the Joint Committee, people earning between 50 and 75 will get a sizable reduction in their 2019. The average cut there would be about $850 as a tax policy center. Overall, 62% of Americans would pay at least $100 less in 2019. Old man McConnell, they count as a winner here. Toomey of Pennsylvania, was one of the main authors of the bill, no doubt about it. Shouldn't have been reelected there. Rich kids, wealthy parents to pass property onto their kids. On the current law, up to $5.5 million can be passed down tax-free after that 40% known as the estate tax. The Senate would allow rich people to pass on $11 million worth there. And the losers, the Democrats had no filibuster there because there's 51 votes. Bob Corker, they count as a loser. Well, I'm not sure about all that. People who care for the deficit, well, that's gone. They didn't care about that. 13 million Americans who want to have health insurance. The Senate bill isn't just a tax bill. It includes repeal of the individual mandate that required Americans to buy health insurance. The poor, the Senate... across all incomes, 44% of Americans don't pay, that's a very large number, pay any income tax, so it doesn't help them. Some senators, Marco Vegas Rubio and Mike Lee, he's from Utah, pushed to give more money back to the low-income sector, wanted to make the child care tax credit refundable. That didn't work out for them. In Puerto Rico, the island was devastated by Maria and might lose some big businesses that remain on the island The reason is Puerto Rico would no longer look so advantageous as a place to do business compared to the rest. Puerto Rican government was trying to push the island to be a free trade zone. And Harvard, the old school, we used to walk around the campus anyway, would create a new 4.1 tax on private endowments over $500,000. Only a handful of universities have such large, and they're in the Ivy League. Well, they'll adjust. They'll pay the taxes. Don't worry about that. Maybe losers, college students. The bill strapped many popular deductions for college students and college graduates with eliminates the popular student loan debt write-off, forces graduate students who receive tuition waivers, some as much as $20,000 to count, sort of like unemployment does, towards your tax bill. Elderly with high medical expenses, the House bill gets rid of deductions for huge medical expenses, which 8.8 million Americans, mostly elderly, currently use. The Senate would keep the deduction in place. They'll have to work it out in conference. Michael Flynn, we talked about him before. Big headline there. He pled guilty as charged. There he was advisor to DJ Trump. He admitted his plea that he lied to the FBI about several December conversations with Kesloff. On the 22nd, he contacted the Russian ambassador by the incoming administration opposition to condemning the Zionist settlements as illegal, and requested the Russian Federation vote against it or delay it. The ambassador later called back and indicated Russia would not vote against it. Another conversation, he called the ambassador. He asked Russia not to escalate an ongoing feud over sanctions imposed by the Obama administration. Flynn admitted as part of when the FBI asked him on the 24th, 4 days after the inauguration of DJ Trump, his dealings there, he did not truthfully describe them. He admitted before speaking with the ambassador he had called a transition official at the Mar-a-Lago state as DJ Trump's situation there. Told senior members of the transition team, quote, records said, the senior member not identified in the records is this KT McFarland. And McFarland may not make it to Singapore. And then Kushner is in there. That's his president's son-in-law. So a lot of things that haven't come out yet. Was forced to resign. That's history there on Flynn. In a statement, Ty Cobb, no relation to the baseball player, the false statements involved mirror the false statements to the White House officials, which resulted in his resignation in February. Nothing about the guilty plea or charge implicate anyone other than Mr. Flynn. The conclusion of this phase of the special counsel's work demonstrates again the special counsel is moving with all deliberate speed and clearing the way for a prompt and reasonable conclusion, they hope. In recent weeks, attorneys expected Flynn to plead guilty. Flynn negotiated to cooperate with Mueller's team here. And Flynn had withdrawn from them. What else we got here? The police cops, the stunning fall of the general. He's a native of Rhode Island. I don't know where he came from. But anyway, joined the Army officer school and chose early in his career to specialize in intelligence. Among his mentors was Stanley McChrystal, who plays his ability in Afghanistan. McChrystal, of course, was forced out. Flynn was named Director of National of the Defense Intelligence Agency, but ranked some subordinates who questioned his temperament and decision-making. President Barack Obama removed him from the post in 2014. So that's the story of Mr. Flynn. He was one of the big cheerleaders for DJ Trump, like Coca. Linda English, she's a deputy director of Consumer Financial Protection Agency. She's suing DJ Trump. Trump tried to claim that the agency had devastated lenders. They've devastated payday loan operators of a scam artist, no doubt about that. In an email to managers on a Thursday, she reminded them of pending enforcement action and said other routine reports on consumer protection are due in December. To make sure they're still on track, that's according to, this is from Reuters and signed it Lerner English, acting director. This Mulvaney character, the budget director, a right-wing former senator, he's increasing his influence at the agency. That's the spokesman for this Jeb Harsling. I hope I pronounced. The financial committee there confirmed that Brian Johnson, one of his top aides, had left the committee to assist him. This is a Republican takeover. And what is basically happening here is that the electoral process for the Republicans is panning out. And unfortunately, progressives have spent time worrying about John Conyers. Now, that's turned incidentally on John Conyers into a racial situation. Evidently, Representative Clyburn talked about that, the women that accused him were all Europeans. I didn't know that. But people, House staffs, Senate staffs are drawn from various people all over the country. One woman out of Chicago, we looked at a voice Tourette's incidentally with her, and she was not totally truthful in her allegations. She worked for Representative Conyers for 11 years. But when you get that kind of mania as the poet, writer, scholar, humorist, etc., Garrison Keillor talked about these manias, these things sidetrack, and what happens is the Senate Ethics Committee, where it's not a near perfect, and House Ethics Committee, they do an investigation. And H is correct about that. Let the investigations take care of it. Now, we don't know if Representative Conyers, who's been around since 1965, Dr. King himself campaigned for him. He's the only one that's left. Being 88 years old, he is the oldest member in the House, whether he'll resign or not. From this mic, we see there's no case for Representative Conyers to resign. Let the process run and the investigation, and at that point, you'll be running into 2018, which is election year. Whether he'll stand for re-election or not, who knows? Probably not. But serve his term out in dignity and let that part go. Al Franken, they're investigating him, and let that situation pan out. This hysteria doesn't go anywhere, because what it has done is their indications is ended the special election in Alabama. That's Judge Roy Moore and Wimpy Jones, as Moore calls him, down there, Doug Jones in Alabama. We don't know. A new poll has 8 points up, 6 points. This is Judge Moore up over Jones. 5 points up. Is there momentum there? DJ Trump is going to Pensacola. That is known as the Redneck Riviera. That's 20 miles from Mobile. So in other words, it's covered by the same TV station, so that rally will be live. But he's touting a tax bill where most of the people that his so-called, this is DJ Trump's constituency, will not benefit from this. Maybe they'll get $100, and again, that's very tenuous. That's depending a lot on how the economy is there. Getting $100 back, $500 back, doesn't mean anything if you lose your job, because your loss is much greater than that would be. So a lot of that is up in the air on these decade-long situations. There, the chances of the performance coming out is less than 50-50. Now, say in 2018, 2019, if in fact growth this quarter, I believe, is 3.1, something like that, was for Q4. Or Q3, excuse me, October. Well, that can go on, but the problem is the likelihood, if you continue at the present pace, of having a minor recession or middle recession is very good. The market is up, but really the market itself is overvalued. So that is a continuous problem. In a lot of these actors that are up, it's a very tenuous situation, and we'll be monitoring that incidentally this week. We have Numbers Man, that's our macroeconomics program. We'll have that on many of these outlets. Let me move on here to Uncle Karl Rove. Now, that's a little bit dated, but we'll start it out. The debt is no reason to kill tax reform. Tax reform is not polling well in mid-October. CNN poll, 34% of Americans favor tax reform proposals made by DJ Trump. A week later, the Wall Street Journal and NBC News found only 20% the Trump tax plan is a good deal, compared with 35% said it's not. Another poll, it's a CBS poll, said 38% approve of the way Trump is handling tax policy. That is roughly his approval rating. Incidentally, his approval rating on Friday was 36%. So he's up and down. He's in the high 30s. The saving grace for Republicans is that voters trust the GOP more on these issues. Late October survey. This is Politico morning consult. 42% trust the GOP. Boy, that is something else. Polling aside, the GOP is betting that Americans will see the results of tax reform in two important ways: larger paycheck in January, when the reduced withholdings go into effect, a better overall economy that adds jobs and demonstrates greater strength next year. Well, they may get a larger paycheck, but at the same time, all that revolves around if they have a job to get it from. Some senior senators wanted to pass through that small businesses are taxed on the personal code to make parity with corporations. Senate bill gets close. Well, it got closer since he wrote this. Other senators are comfortable using a tax bill to repeal Obamacare. Obamacare uninsured more than a third make $25,000 or less annually, and 80% make less than $50,000. That is the repeal of the individual mandate. So, in other words, many of these people on the $25,000, if it is a family, would qualify for Medicaid, but Medicaid is up in the air, or will be up in the air. A third, the deficit hawks, well, they disappeared. Bob Coker was the only one there. It adds, $9.3 trillion to the national debt over 8 years. Yes, so the deficit is a troubling problem, and about to get worse. It will get worse. The public debt will rise to 75.5% of the gross domestic product in fiscal 2017 to 85.6 in 2026. Yeah, that's like roughly about 10% more than a day, keeping the tax code status quo unfairly detrimental to economic growth. Competitiveness, they've been saying this a long time. Washington collects $42.1 trillion over the next decade. Outlays reaching $51.5 trillion. Well, you'll have less taxes there. Republicans tackle mandatory spending, which is mostly made up of Social Security and Medicare. Different fund there. You have Social Security Trust Fund. CB said mandatory spending will rise 70% of outlays from in 2017 to 78 in 2026. That's 8 percentage points. That will squeeze the discretionary portion of the budget, which includes defense, education, transportation, and elsewhere. So that's Uncle Carl's 2 cents worth there. We won't spend any more time on that. The BBC basically had the same thing. We went over this information earlier there in Word Toomey and the Conservative College. Some various people that went to this Hillsdale College. This Betty DeVos character, brother Eric Prince, is a graduate of that right-wing college. That's around the Amway Empire. It's a private Christian liberal arts school in southern Michigan. It has about 1,400 students. Has an endowment of $500 million, $528 million. That's a lot of money for a very, very small school. Now, but in the ABC put their foot in their mouth. Here's on the Flynn report. The conservative commentators hammered ABC News on a faulty report Friday, claiming that then candidate D.J. Trump had directed General Flynn to contact Russian officials during the campaign. The initial report was added on a special around 6:30. Brian Ross, he's been around a long time, issued an online clarification that the source had explained it was only after the election, evidently that's what it was, that the contact was made. ABC later deleted a clarified post on Twitter. Twitter is a very important situation there, which drew intense criticism online, upgraded to a correction. Network says source said the matter will be addressed on air later today. The original report, which proved to be inaccurate, appeared to link General Flynn's electoral contacts with Russian officials directly to the president. Anyway, correction of special report. So it didn't work out. That's not very good. I mean, this rush to get out there, period. John Connors, we talked about this, the different. In fact, there's a nice picture. We'll put it up. Representative Conyers standing by Al Franken. And they're all smiling. The Congressional Black Caucus airing privately on concerns, a double standard there. He's the longest serving House member, founder of the Congressional Black Caucus, surfaced their concerns for us to the open when Congress lawyer hinted that Congress was being treated differently. Nancy Pelosi is not going to is going to have to explain what discernible difference between the charges. That's from Mr. Arnold Reed, an attorney in Detroit. Members did not attack Pelosi. They should have. The 49 lawmakers in it had a course of people that are calling for John to resign is notably larger than anyone else. That's from Cedric Richardson. He's from Louisiana. And there are various other people churning in here. This is a Político, incidentally. Heard some other things from Clyburn here. It's not in this article here. In addition to conversations with Richardson and Clyburn, dialed multiple members, as of Nancy Pelosi. It doesn't really matter. Mr. Reed, again, says she's only trying to save face after being criticized for her Meet the Press performance. For her to use an opportunity for a rebound situation when she did absolutely terrible and got creamed on Meet the Press is shameful, Attorney Reed said. CBC members notably did not follow suit. Let's be clear, she's not going to decide his fate. We hope so. They did what they had to do. So Emmanuel Cleaver, he's out of St. Louis, who has been counseling Kanye since last week, and said Pelosi and Clyburn agreed that they had to do what they did. As for the contrast, if Pelosi chooses to give a response in regard to Al Franken, she could do that. Meeks said, this is Mr. Meeks, but I can't say that Nancy Pelosi's motivations were based upon race. Well, he's just trying to curry a favor. More of this will come out. Let's do the sports now. The Warriors were at the Magic. Warriors won 33 to 112. The Pistons were in D.C. Wizards won 109 to 91. The Pacers were at the Raptors in Toronto. Raptors 120 to 115 for the Pacers. The Hornets were at the Heat. Heat 105 to 100. The Kings were in Chicago, and they pulled that out by 1 point, 107 to 106. The Spurs were at the Grizzlies. Spurs 95 to 79. The T-Wolves were at the Thunder. Thunder 111 to 107 for the T-Wolves. The Pelicans and the Jazz to 114 to 108. Jazz over the Pelicans of New Orleans. Anyway, so we got the playoffs lining up here. Let me just briefly go into that scenario. Number number 8, Ohio State, they're 10-2, and number 4, Wisconsin, 12-0. If Ohio State win, the two-loss knock out the Badgers and open the door for a great debate about 11-1 Alabama. Be very interesting there. Are Alabama and Ohio State compatible? It would seem they are not at this moment, as evidenced by number 5. I thought they dropped to number 4. Bama ranking for a whole cut here. Anyway, if that should change, if Ohio State wins the conference championship, I don't know how the selection is. It's a selection committee, remember that. The case that Ohio State would have 2 top wins against number 9 Penn State and number 4 Wisconsin and number 16 Michigan State. If Wisconsin wins, the Badgers are in. They will finish the season as an undefeated power. They are number 4 in the ESPN Strength Record Matrix. And more of it in here. 2, number 11 TCU and number 3 Oklahoma. They are 11-1. TCU is 10-2. If TCU wins, the league championship game would be brought back for the sole purpose of creating a chance of having a top 4 team. The committee didn't think TCU was a top 10 team. They lost to Iowa State and Oklahoma State. If Oklahoma wins, the Sooners will be in. And resurgent Big 12 championship game works in the league's favor. OU is rated number 1 in the country in offense. They have a Heisman Trophy hopeful named Baker Mayfield. Never heard of Mr. Mayfield. Alabama is rooting for TCU, number 7 Miami, and number 1 Clemson. If the Canes should win, the top 4 win there, the question is a 2 less loss. Clemson didn't win the conference there. The committee drops Georgia from number 1 to number 7. It drops Bama from number 1 to number 5 this week after loss to Auburn. If Clemson wins, the Tigers should finish the season as the committee's number 1 team, knocks the Canes out for good. Clemson currently has 7 wins against teams above 500. Georgia and Auburn. Auburn's 10-2. Georgia's 11-1. If Georgia wins, the Bulldogs would finish in the top 2 after averaging regular season. Let's see. Ohio State sneaks in. Georgia's one of 3 teams to be ranked in the top 10 in offense and defense, along with Clemson and Alabama. If Auburn wins, the Tigers become the first two-loss team in the semifinals after being number one. And he won't even go into what Memphis is doing. That's way down here. But anyway, this is their playoff situation and setting up the championship. Now we do have playoffs in college basketball, and we'll see where we end up. This will end it for us. We'll see you on the Monday morning. The quarterback will reappear here is a numbers man on many of these same outlets, and we have an open source report. We're about 60% finished with it. It'll appear this weekend too, so we'll have two different reports coming up. I'm not certain what we'll be doing on Bostonred on the World as my voice plays out here, but we'll see. And will we have special Sunday program? I'm not sure about that. We'll see about that. Two things up in the air here. But we do now have Bostonred on the World and iHeartRadio. So you can go to any iHeart station across these 50 states in New Zealand or wherever iHeart is, and just type in the search the word Bostonred, and these should come up, a Bostonred on the World. If you type in Bostonred, you'll get our open source report should pop up there, and the Bostonred program. And for Numbers Man, you need to type in Numbers Man in some instances. It will pop up also, depending on which outlet you're on. If you're on Stitcher, you'll get all of those. If you are on Speaker, you'll get all of the Bostonred stuff there, with the exception of Numbers Man. It's not over there. And All About Sports will make its premiere. It'll be over on Spreaker. Those that haven't up on it, Spreaker and Blog Talk have merged, and they're working through those machinations. It appears to us that iHeart is more closely integrated with Spreaker, which is very good because they have a very good app, and they are all over the place, quite literally. We're also on Amazon. That's the Echo speakers. We're on Sonar and more speakers there for Internet radio. So Internet radio is moving on. The podcasting game is moving more or less out. Because what is happening now, getting integrated into these radio stations, which is a good thing, because it affords many people an opportunity to reach more and more people. Now, granted, places like iHeart do not promote you. You have to promote yourself. But some of the other outlets do. And you're using Twitter basically as your promotion. Not certain about Facebook here. And then you have old dinosaurs around, like the Apple thing. I'm not sure what's going on over on Apple. I haven't even looked. But you have YouTube. YouTube is a very good outlet for people. It can bring in numbers, and we're audio over there. We're going to get some video in. And hopefully next week or the next week, we'll be back to live stream. What happened at live stream was, unless you pay for their service, which is roughly about $1,200 a year, they do not save your content, I believe, beyond 30 days. They used to save the content, but they don't. But you can do your programs on live stream and then take those programs over to YouTube. They do have a very good editing program there, and so does YouTube. So use live stream, edit your program, and then upload it to YouTube and be happy ever after. Have a good weekend, everyone. We'll talk to you on a Monday morning.